In the late 1990s, when MTV still ruled the world, a teenage girl appeared on screens across America. Pale light, dark eyeliner, a camera that lingered too long. Her name was Fiona Apple. Her eyes were weary and wise, her voice raw enough to bleed through static. And the song, Criminal. It was seductive, tortured, unsettling, a confession wrapped in slow-motion guilt. For most people, that was their first glimpse of her. The bad girl, the Lolita, the angry prodigy. But the truth was stranger, sadder, and far more human. Behind those haunted eyes was a child who had already lived a lifetime. Fiona Apple. McAfee Maggart grew up in New York City, surrounded by music, theater, and chaos. Her father was an actor, her mother a singer. Art was everywhere, and so was anxiety. By 11, she was writing piano pieces that sounded like diary entries, melodies that didn't resolve, chords that clung to pain. And then at 12, her childhood ended in a moment of violence she would only describe later, in fragments. It changed her completely. She turned inward, built songs instead of walls. Music became the only language that didn't lie. When she was 17, she recorded a demo on a cassette, just her voice and a piano. A friend passed it to a publicist. Within months, a major label wanted her. What followed was a debut that didn't just introduce her, it announced her. Title, 1996. A storm of jazz chords, confessions, and grief, unlike anything on the radio. While pop stars smiled, Fiona stared straight through you. When she sang, "I've been a bad, bad girl," she wasn't flirting. She was indicting herself and everyone watching. The world applauded, but it misunderstood. Critics called her sultry, provocative, dangerous. MTV played the Criminal video endlessly. A teenage girl alone in half-lit rooms, filmed like a scandal. To executives, it was brilliant marketing. To Fiona, it felt like betrayal. The song was about guilt, shame, and exploitation. And the video turned it into exactly what it was condemning. She once said, "It's a song about feeling bad for getting something by using your sexuality." And then the video made me feel worse. Fame came like a flood and washed away her sense of control. She was barely 19, living in hotel rooms, doing interviews with grown men who dissected her body more than her art. At the 1997 MTV Europe Music Awards, she walked on stage to accept Best New Artist and delivered a speech that would follow her for decades. This world is BS. And you shouldn't model your life about what you think that we think is cool. Go with yourself. The audience froze. Some cheered. Most didn't know what to make of her. MTV replayed it for years, as if it were a meltdown, not a manifesto. She was 19, standing on the same stage as the Backstreet Boys and Puff Daddy, and dared to tell the truth. That night, the media decided who Fiona Apple was. The headlines wrote themselves: unhinged, ungrateful, difficult. But beneath the noise, she was just a young woman choking on honesty. After Tidal, she tried to escape the cage that fame had built. Her next record, When the Pawn, was angrier, sharper, fearless. Its full title, a 90-word poem about self-defense and defiance. On the cover, her eyes no longer pleaded. They dared you to misunderstand her again. She once said, "I'm not crazy. I'm just louder than you." But in an industry run by people who mistake quiet suffering for professionalism, loud truth is dangerous. Through the early 2000s, she vanished. No interviews, no tours, no explanations. The tabloids called her reclusive. The truth? She was recovering. She was learning how to make art without losing herself. When Extraordinary Machine was leaked in 2004, it became a cult mystery. Fans begged the label to release it. A campaign called Free Fiona spread online, one of the first viral fan movements of the internet era. The label eventually relented, but the damage was done. Fiona had seen what the machine looked like from the inside and wanted no part of it. When the official version arrived in 2005, it sounded like no one else on Earth. Songs built from carnival rhythms, chamber pop, and piano lines that stuttered like speech. It wasn't made for radio, it was made for truth. She sang, "I'm good at being uncomfortable, so I can't stop changing all the time." That line, that defiance, became her philosophy. Still, she felt out of place. Her music was too literary for pop, too vulnerable for alternative, too honest for the mainstream. But that was exactly what made her timeless. In the years that followed, she toured sporadically, released little, and spoke even less. To the outside world, it looked like she had disappeared again. But behind the silence, something was building. By 2012, the world had changed, but Fiona Apple hadn't. Her fourth album, The Idler Wheel, felt like a diary sung through gritted teeth. It was recorded on analog tape, using found percussion. Pots, walls, boots, raw, intimate, unguarded. She wrote about loneliness, aging, and the kind of love that leaves bruises you can't see. When she sang, "Every single night's a fight with my brain," it wasn't poetry, it was confession. Critics called it a masterpiece of discomfort. To fans, it was proof that Fiona Apple didn't need the spotlight. The spotlight needed her. And then, she vanished again. 8 years passed. No new music, no explanation. But when she finally spoke again, it was through art that sounded like liberation. April 2020. The world was silent. Cities locked down, streets empty, people afraid. And then, without warning, Fiona Apple returned. Her fifth album dropped like a thunderclap. Fetch the Bolt Cutters. Recorded entirely at home, with her dogs barking in the background and household objects turned into instruments. It wasn't just music, it was rebellion. The title came from a line in a British crime series. It became a mantra for anyone trapped by fear, by expectation, by their own past. "Fetch the bolt cutters," she said. "I've been in here too long." The album was messy, imperfect, alive. It sounded like therapy, the kind that doesn't heal neatly. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh, every bark stayed in the mix. Because that was the point. She wasn't chasing perfection. She was chasing freedom. It won the Grammy for Best Alternative Album, but that barely mattered. What mattered was that Fiona Apple had outlasted the machine that once tried to define her. She told The New Yorker, "I have no interest in being cool. I'm interested in being real." In that one sentence lies the entire story. Fiona Apple's career doesn't follow the usual pattern of rise, fall, redemption. It's a cycle of resistance and rebirth. Every album is a different version of her fighting back. Title, survival. When the Pawn, rebellion. Extraordinary Machine, reconstruction. Idler Wheel, introspection. Fetch the Bolt Cutters, liberation. Each time she disappeared, people assumed she was done. Each time she returned, she rewrote the rules. In an era obsessed with content, she reminded the world that silence can be art, that patience can be protest, that healing is not the same as hiding. Even now, she rarely performs, rarely gives interviews, but her voice echoes through a generation of artists who refuse to play nice. From Billie Eilish to Phoebe Bridgers, St. Vincent to Mitski, they cite her not just as an influence, but as proof that you can survive the system without surrendering to it. Fiona Apple became something else entirely, an advocate. She's used her voice for causes that rarely make headlines: criminal justice reform, women's safety, animal rights, and privacy for survivors of assault. In 2023, she released her first new song in 5 years, pre-trial, Let Her Go Home, calling for bail reform and compassion for people forgotten by the system. The same woman who once screamed into a camera about guilt now sings about mercy. It's the same fire, tempered by purpose. She told Vulture, "I'm not here to entertain anyone anymore. I'm here to tell the truth, and maybe that's why she's still here, while so many others burned out, sold out, or gave up." Because Fiona Apple never treated music as a product. She treated it as survival. If you've ever felt misunderstood, misjudged, or mislabeled, her story is a mirror. She reminds us that reinvention isn't about changing who you are. It's about returning to yourself, unfiltered. If you're feeling that right now, hit the like button, subscribe to Beyond the Riff, and keep discovering the artists who turn their pain into poetry. Because every time we listen deeper, we break our own bolt cutters too. To understand Fiona Apple's reinvention, you have to understand what she refused to become. She could have been a pop star. She could have played the game, smiled for cameras, performed on cue. Instead, she built a career on vanishing. Every silence between albums was a boundary. Every comeback was a confession. Where most artists reinvent themselves to please the audience, Fiona reinvented herself to survive it. She once said, "The more I stay myself, the more misunderstood I become. But the more misunderstood I become, the freer I get." That's the paradox of her genius. She wins by disappearing and speaks loudest when she's silent. Nearly 30 years after Tidal, Fiona Apple's music still sounds like no one else's. Because she never chased trends, she chased truth. You can hear it in the cracks of her voice, the thump of her piano, the way she turns shame into strength. Every song feels like she's letting you read her journal. Not because she wants you to, but because she can't stop telling the truth. Her songs don't age, they evolve with you. When you're young, you hear pain. When you're older, you hear power. That's the mark of a living artist. Someone whose work keeps growing even when she's gone quiet. There's a moment deep in Fetch the Bolt Cutters where Fiona Apple laughs in the middle of a take. It's not a perfect note, it's a perfect truth. A sound of someone finally free. She's not chasing applause anymore. She's chasing peace. Her journey, from criminal to bolt cutters, isn't the story of fame. It's the story of reclamation, of a woman who took the weapon the world used against her, her honesty, and turned it into art that could never be tamed. And maybe that's why Fiona Apple matters more now than ever. Because in an era built on noise, she reminds us that silence can be power, that vulnerability can be armor, that reinvention isn't about becoming someone new, it's about daring to be exactly who you are, even when the world tells you not to. Fiona Apple never wanted to be a pop icon. She wanted to be free. And somehow, by breaking every rule, she finally is.